first tactic for these guys was one of my favorites, using the 6-year rule on an investment property purchase that was going to eventually be their forever home. That created an $18,000 tax saving in year one. Next, they leveraged their employer share purchase plan, which created $7,000 of guaranteed upside, probably a fair bit more depending on what happens in the stock market. Then they started investing with a focus on shares that pay franked dividends with tax credits. That created $7,680 of tax upside. They also shut down a trust that saved them $7,200 a year, and they moved their investments over to an investment bond. On top of that, they maxed out their super contributions. That created $19,200 of annual saving. And the final one was that they did a budget for the very first time in their life, which created a $13,840 upside, but probably a fair bit more. Now, this couple were struggling when they came to us with information overload. They were super smart, really analytical. They've been doing heaps and heaps of research, but they felt like the more research that they did, the further away that they ended up from actually making a decision and taking action. In terms of the financials, they were in their mid-30s, the household income $320,000. They were saving just over $55,000 a year. Going back to these strategies, the first one is an absolute pearler. So these guys, they had an investment property, and then they were buying a property that was going to be their forever home. Now, what they did was that because they were moving out of an investment property and moving into this other property, which is their home, they nominated their old investment property as their own home because they were previously living in it, leveraged the 6-year rule, which allows you to not pay any capital gains tax on the property if you move out of a property while it's nominated as your own home for a full 6-year period. They then moved into their home, and because they knew that that was going to be their forever home and they were never going to sell it, it didn't matter that they had that 6-year window, which is effectively was accruing capital gains for them on the property. It's a really cool strategy because you can then sell your investment property CGT free, but pick up 6 years of extra gains and not pay the tax on it, then use that money to essentially fund your retirement. The second one was leveraging their employee share purchase plan. They worked at a tech company and they offered this thing where you could buy employer shares, and if you bought them, they give you a guaranteed discount. So that's where the guaranteed upside came from. They did come with a cash flow cost because they needed to actually fund the share purchase, but they had the cash flow to do it. So they were essentially getting free money through this strategy. They had a trust that they had set up for some investing, but they weren't really investing heaps into the trust, and it was sitting there costing them a bunch of money every year. They closed that down, moved the investments to an investment bond, which is a lot cheaper to manage than running a full trust. And they also focused on using shares that had franked dividends attached to them, so they got more tax credits. Those two strategies combined for over $14,000 of annual tax benefits and fee savings. They maxed out their super contributions, which was money that they were effectively leaving on the table, $20,000 of annual upside as a result, plus creating a mechanism to get money invested into a low tax super environment to then pay less tax on their investment income moving forward. On top of this, the icing on the cake was that they did a budget for the first time. Now, these guys were pretty switched on with their spending, but they were basically just managing everything ad hoc. So doing the budget, they planned to save $13,800 more than they had in previous years, but in reality it was probably a whole lot more because of the fact that when they didn't have a budget in place and things came up like taking a trip or some of those bigger lifestyle expenses, they ended up spending more. Now, I mentioned at the start that these guys were super analytical and had done a fair bit of research, so you might think that throwing more options at them might be counterproductive when it comes to their decisions, but what we actually did through the planning process is that we cut out a bunch of options that really didn't make sense. That meant that they could narrow their focus between choosing between a few options that did make sense for them, and then we shared the experience of other people that had gone down that path so that they could really understand the consideration set and make the best decisions from them. That narrowing of the focus allowed them to make decisions more effectively and then take action a whole lot sooner. Once they had that knowledge, they captured some upside pretty quickly, as you can see from those numbers, but the bigger benefit for these guys was that they were able to pull the trigger on funding private education for their kids. That was something that was on their radar, but they've been really reluctant to commit to because they didn't have the funds available to actually do that, or they weren't sure if they could afford it and still hit their investing goals to set up for the future future for the family that they wanted. When they could see it all on paper, though, they realized that it was possible and achievable, with the extra upside making a big contribution to that. Information overload is real, but it can be overcome. Sometimes less is more.